Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and we are joined this morning by GardenLine's Skip Richter. Welcome back to the program, Skip. We're happy to have you back.
Thank you, Christina. It's great to be back.
Thank you so much. And I know you have some wonderful information, timely information to share with us today. Before we get into all of that, if you could, I know you've been on the program before, but for anyone who missed you the last time you were on, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, I'm the host of Garden Line every Saturday and Sunday morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. in Houston. It really serves the greater Houston area. I really should say from Louisiana to New Braunfels. It's a widely broadcast show, so we reach a lot of folks. I'm also county agriculture horticulturist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension in College Station area.
Very good. And so this has been a lifelong, I mean, this is your career. It's been a lifelong passion of yours to bring attention, to educate others. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. In fact, December 31st, I'll retire after 34 years of doing this professionally and then continue as a broadcaster doing the same thing.
Very good. Well, that is very exciting and congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, you wouldn't guess it walking outside today and now with the weather changing a little bit, but we had a pretty significant drought this summer, and that drought seemed to take a toll on all of our yards, plants, trees. What were you finding was impacted the most?
Really, the yards, at least visually, the yards. We have people that every weekend are calling that they lost whole sections of their grass and a lot of issues with that. Trees were impacted a lot, and that is a bigger loss because, the value of a tree and the time it takes to get a tree back into a full-size shade tree, for example, is that is a huge financial concern. But visually right now, it's the lawns.
The lawns. So, and I know you have some suggestions for us and what we can do with those lawns, but something that we keep hearing is about the Farmer's Almanac, which has been predicting weather for over 200 years. It's forecasting a potentially severe Texas winter for January and February of 2024. How is that different from what we experienced last year with the December cold snap? And is that going to affect us differently this year?
Well, first of all, Farmer's Almanac predicts weather a long time out, in time enough to go to press and then ship for the rest of the next year. If you've ever watched the weather, anything further than 7 days out as a prediction is a little iffy. So you take it with a grain of salt. Maybe they'll be right, maybe they won't. But the bottom line is our plants have been through several years of stresses. In February of 2021, we had a very hard freeze that was unseasonable for any area of around Houston. That took a toll. We've had two extensive and very extreme heat and drought summers following that. You mentioned December last fall, that our last winter, early winter, that caught our plants off guard, especially things like crepe myrtles that are normally hardy. They just weren't ready. So we've got plants that are under a number of stresses, and when you get stressed, issues start to arise. Just like with our bodies, you don't eat, you don't sleep, and so on. You're more likely to get sick, and we're seeing things like take all root rot, which is a fungus in our lawns. We're seeing hypoxylon canker, which is a disease that kills oaks, but only when the oaks are severely weakened. And those are just two examples of what I'm talking about. So our goal right now is to do everything we can to help our plants get healthy. And if you remember the old adage when you went to the doctor and you had a cold virus, it would be get plenty of rest and drink lots of fluids. And what was he saying? I can't kill the virus, but I can help your body get back on its feet and survive and avoid additional stress. And that's the same thing with our landscape plants.
Okay, well, tell us what can we do to
All
help
right.
our landscape. So, because again, it sounds like now is the time of year that we need to start preparing for the winter season. So, what are some tips, timely tips that we could be doing right now?
I tell listeners every week now, October is the most important month of the year for your lawn. And that doesn't, you'd think, well, that ought to be in the spring or the summer. No, right now, your lawn grasses are storing up carbohydrates to help them go through winter. And I don't want to get too technical, but it does help to understand the why of what I'm telling you. And that is that The grass coming in the spring, coming out of winter, all the growth and energy is fueled by what it had going into out of the fall into the winter. So to strengthen your grass now means it looks better in the spring. It takes a few weeks or months of spring before the roots are really feeding the grass from the spring fertilization.
Mm.
So it is just so important. We're not trying to make the grass grow now. We're trying to establish carbohydrates, which is like antifreeze. It makes it more cold hardy and it makes it more drought resilient when we do that. And if people go online, I've put a couple of schedules online. One is my lawn care schedule, and it's at gardeningwithskip.com. Real easy, gardening with Skip, that's me.com. And if you go there, it'll tell you every month of the year what to fertilize and what ratio of products to use, and even give some local examples. And in the fall, our nitrogen levels in fertilizer are lower, and our potassium, the third number, is higher. And that's all part of that winter hardiness. And doing that now is critical. No matter how your lawn looks, do everything you can now to help it, because it's going to need it coming out of winter.
Okay, very good. I wouldn't have guessed, as you said, that October is the most important month, but it sounds like we're going to be going to your website and we're going to be very busy this weekend at my house, at least.
I hope so. We made it to help, and I really hope that that's the case.
Very good. And we did share that website in the comments as well. If you have questions for Skip and you're tuned in live, type in those questions. We will get to as many questions as we can. Now, of course, our audience is a majority realtors that are tuned in to this program, and they're working with home sellers and home buyers year round. Home sellers are sometimes, they're on a tight budget. They're trying to save money on home repairs and improvements. What are your thoughts on yard improvement and curb appeal? And do you think that's a good place for people to try to maybe save money?
That is a good point. And every realtor knows that it's all about first impressions. That's very important when people drive up, when they walk in. And so anything you can do to spruce up the place is a good idea. Just be careful not to, if you're planning on selling the home in the short term, which I know most people are, don't spend too much money on long-term improvements. For example, putting in a tree in the front yard, probably not worth the cost of doing that if you're trying to just turn the home pretty quick. If you're looking longer term, then absolutely, trees and shrubs and everything is important. If you've got dead plants, yes, replace them. Maybe it's a line of shrubs around the house. Go ahead and replace them. It does make that curb appeal. But we focus on annuals especially. We're entering the cool season right now. So pansies, violas, something called Dusty Miller, which is a silvery foliage plant, dianthus, it's also called Sweet William, snapdragons, alyssum. There's a lot of cool season plants that we can do to give a really good color impact. Remember that there's two ways we view plants, from a distance and up close. If you're up close, a mix of all these wonderful colors is cool to look at. But when you're at the road and you're looking all the way across the yard at the front of the house, if you have too many colors close together, they just sort of blend in to one color. And so it's better to use large swaths of color. Maybe you have something that's a big band of white flowers, and in front of that is a big band of red flowers. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And using those large swaths is more important. As you get closer, maybe a container with some flowers spilling over the side that does have a lot more interest. Different kinds of blooms and colors is a good idea too. That could be the front of the house, but that could also be that back patio that you want to make an impression with.
Okay, and that really leads us into the next question I had for you was, are those recommendations different from winter? Because in winter, it's a little more maybe gloomy outside. We don't have leaves on the trees. So is your recommendation to just focus on those flower beds and try to make those as nice as possible?
Yes, again, we're talking short term here. You know, were someone planning a landscape, I would say, well, pick flowers that bloom in the spring. That's easy. Summer is a little more difficult, but include those, and then include things that bloom in the fall, so that you have year-round interest, even to the point of like crepe myrtle bark in the winter is an interesting structural feature, and things like that. But for getting it ready to sell, then we're looking a little more short term.
Okay, we do have a couple questions and comments coming in that I want to address. Andrea asked, what can we do for our magnolia trees?
If a magnolia is brown, it's probably gone. The way we put it is, if it's brown, cut it down. Magnolias are evergreens, and when they truly turn all brown, that has been such a system-wide, the plant's whole system-wide problem that it's gone and it's
Mm,
not going to come back. If it's some brown spots here and there in a shrub or a bush, you can prune those out. It's not the ideal look, but you can
mhm.
do that. And so summer has created a lot of that kind of look, unfortunately.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some magnolia trees that are brown. I know in my area. Now, is it you're mentioning if you see some brown, it's okay to prune it out? This is an okay time to be pruning those
It
trees?
is. Yeah, it is. When you're cutting out dead wood, you can do it at any time. We have times of the year we'd prefer to do our normal pruning,
Hmm.
but pruning stimulates new growth. But when you're cutting out dead wood, it's not stimulating anything. It's like clipping your fingernails. I mean, it's just dead stuff that's out of the way, and that's kind of how you think about it at this point in the year.
Great, excellent suggestion. Another question that came in from Jessica. She said, "How can I keep ants out of my potted plants?"
Well, I guess the first question is what kind of ants? If it's fire ants,
Hmm.
that's a concern, and that's done with baits or with insecticidal drenches. I would probably use any common insecticide available over the shelf and just drench it into the flower pot, and it would take care of that. But we have hundreds of species of ants that are really of no concern to our plants whatsoever. Now, people may not like the idea of ants crawling around, but it's nature, and
Hmm.
nature has a lot of things crawling around, but they're not a threat to the plants themselves. But yeah, the insecticide would be a simple way to do it.
Okay, very good. Just a comment that came in from Teresa. She said, "This is exactly where I need to be this morning. My front yard looks and feels like hay." So, again, we'd recommend to head to Skip's website, right, and see what we need to do about that yard.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm getting a question a lot now is like, do I resod now? And
Mm,
ideally, we would rather not resod this late in the season because the sod isn't going to have enough time to put a whole lot of roots in the ground before growth slows to a halt for the winter. But if you're trying to sell a house, it may not be a bad idea to go ahead and do it. Just make sure it gets watered actually once or twice a day, very lightly after
mm.
sodding, because the sod comes in with this little thin sliver of black clay soil, and that's all the roots it has. So we have to water very shallow and infrequently for a week or two in order to get it established. But at least that way you would have grass in front of folks
Okay,
if
great
people are going to
suggestion.
come maybe by the house.
Yeah, thank you. Another question that just came in from Doreen. She asked, "When can you cut limbs from large oak trees?"
The best time to prune is at the end of winter because the fastest time of wound healing is in the spring. You can prune any time of the year that you need to. So if you're doing a lot of pruning, I would say wait until maybe, late January,
Mm.
sometime around there. There's not a magical number, but sometime around there to do your pruning. If you just need to do a little trimming here and there, just go ahead and get it done if you need to.
Okay, very good. If you have more questions for Skip, please type those in. And again, we'll get to as many as we can. So, you've mentioned some recommendations for curb appeal for winter. Now, year round, are those recommendations the same that you would have, or do you have other recommendations outside of winter?
Well, of course, in the spring, that's a huge time for lots of flowers and color, and everything's waking up, and everybody has spring fever. And so it would be a whole different cast of characters in terms of transitioning our landscapes. In our landscape, we can just have plants that are pretty much there all year and put
Hmm.
up with seasons that where the color isn't so great. Or we can go all the way and do like 4 annual changes a year. So, like 4 times during the 12 months, you're pulling out all your color. Maybe let's say we planted those pansies in the winter and spring comes and they're there, but they're not looking that great. And we pull them out and we put in a bunch of petunias to follow them. And then when summer comes, we pull those out and we put in, I don't know, angelonia or some other summer color like that. And so that's what I'm talking about. That's labor and expense. And
Hmm.
for when it comes to curb appeal, that's important. That's just the trade-off. But in the wintertime, we're just putting in some cool season color. Mulch is always a good way to dress things up. Mulch is inexpensive, and you can buy bags of it. And if you've got flower beds that are maybe a few weeds, just covering it up with a bunch of mulch, it'll kill most of the weeds that are not perennials. And it just makes it look good. In an hour, you make a huge difference in the landscape look.
Excellent. A question that came in from Andrea: what plants do you recommend to create a noise barrier specifically for road noise?
Yeah, that's a good one. You want evergreens, number one, so that you have a barrier all year. Just be aware that plants filter noise, they don't block it. It's not like a wall that noise just reflects and bounces off of. It sort of filters through them. So it does reduce noise. But if you've ever seen the pictures of noise waves, those little curved bands going around as it goes forward. If your hedge was only 6 feet high, that noise essentially just comes right over it, and the noise waves come through. So you've got to get it taller, to get that noise blocking. Just something to think about.
Okay, very good. Another question that came in, and a comment from Melissa. She said, "Good morning. We so need this." So I just wanted to share that. Donna asked, "What's the best way to cut crepe myrtles? Is there a better time of year to cut or trim?"
Again, late winter is the best time, but anytime you need a trim here or there is a good time. Now, the standard, drive around town and look at 90% of the crepe myrtles and don't prune like that. It's called crepe murder. Crepe myrtles have a beautiful structure, a smooth bark, exfoliating bark. Some of them have cinnamon colored exfoliating bark, very beautiful. And because landscape crews have nothing to do in the winter, there's no lawns to mow, they hand them long handle pruners and say, go out and cut off everything about 6, 8 feet high. And we end up with these stubbed off plants. And then we get this, what we call a crow's foot of new growth, coming out of that cut end. And it just looks horrible, and it destroys the structure. So we call the kind of pruning we want to do training rather than hedging. When you hedge, you just shear off something. Training is, I'll use my hand again as an example, but if my hand is a shoot right here and you have a branch going off to the side, like my thumb, you would just then want to cut it off right above that. And think of it as a highway. And you put a blockade on the highway, but you do it right after an off ramp. So all the traffic goes down that off ramp. That's how we're pruning a crepe myrtle. We come down a branch to where there's a side branch, and we cut it off right above that side branch. And when you get through pruning, it looks very natural still. It doesn't look hedged or, as we say, murdered.
Yeah. All right. Excellent advice. Thank you. So going back to, people potentially putting their home on the market, or just homeowners in general, is there a specific plant or tree that you should avoid?
There's a number of them. When we generalize, it's always a generalization and there are exceptions. But if it grows fast, it probably dies young when it comes to trees. There are silver maples. There are a number of tree species that just don't have good long-term structure. And when you think about the beauty of a gorgeous older home, it's got giant shade trees in the landscape that structurally they're strong and sound. They've been pruned well. And those are the kind of plants we want. Now, that doesn't mean you have to wait on a super slow growing tree. We can pick moderately growing species. There's some wonderful red oaks that do that well. There are some wonderful elms that do that well, and other species also. And we provide that kind of information for callers just to direct them in that way. And I would select trees like that and then fertilize them, take care of them so they do have a good growth rate. But oftentimes the tree that's for sale for cheap in the nursery is for sale for cheap for a reason. Maybe it's been there a year too long, and now it has roots just wrapping up in that container that it's growing in, and that is a mess. When you pull a tree out of the pot that you've purchased and you see roots going sideways around the container, you need to cut them, and that's hard for people to do. But if you will prune those roots with your hand pruners in 3 or 4 places around the plant, and if you were to come back 2 weeks later, you would already see fresh white roots growing out into the ground from those cut points. And that is very important for the long term. As in many things in life, shortcuts in the short term don't lend themselves to good things in the long term.
That makes sense. So a couple more questions that came in I wanted to address. Claudia asked, is 15 feet and more the standard distance for trees to be planted away from a home to avoid foundation damage, or what would be a safe distance?
That's good. It would depend on the size of the tree ultimately. 15 feet is a good start. If it's going to be anything with any branch spread at all, a large red oak or a live oak, you're going to have branches on the roof. You're going to have branches under the eaves, depending on how close you get. And those are all issues that are going to be a long-term thing to deal with. Now, the thing with roots, it's not that the roots go under your foundation. If it's a sidewalk or a driveway, yes, a little spaghetti sized root goes under the surface and just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and lifts that driveway and sidewalk up. But with the foundation, what happens is no matter really how close you plant it, roots are going to be all along beside that slab where the water runs off the eaves, especially if you don't have a rain gutter.
Mm-hmm.
And they just suck up all the soil there. And our black clay soils of Houston, the greater Gulf Coast, really, when you dry them out, they shrink. When you wet them, they swell. And that movement of shrink and swell, that's what destroys our streets as you drive through parts of town. That's what breaks water lines downtown.
Mm.
That is what also causes foundations to crack. So it's more the roots taking the water, and it's difficult, just by moving 10 feet to make any big difference with that.
Wow. So Claudia had a follow-up question to that. She's asking, what would you recommend to do for a tree that the roots are starting to affect the foundation?
Some people will recommend doing some sort of a dripper soaker system around the foundation to keep
Mm.
the soil moist and prevent that shrink swell. That would be one. There are root barriers. You can have a quality tree service come out and trench down and put a barrier that physically prevents the roots from getting to there.
Mm.
And that's done under sidewalk or prior to a root entering a sidewalk area as well.
Okay.
That comes at a cost, but that's a
Yeah.
long term thing.
I would
Yeah.
imagine so, yes. Um, Melissa said, my backyard is suddenly 95% weeds after the heat. Do I need to resod the entire backyard? The front is shaded more and is okay.
Well, if I can just have some fun with you, I realize people have a range. Some people, if there's one weed anywhere in the yard, they call in a napalm flyover and it has to die. Uh, Other people, a friend of mine in Mississippi, I love the way he says it. He doesn't care weeds are green, so he says you can make every weed in your lawn go away by doing this. In other words, mow it, weeds are green, it looks good. You decide your tolerance. There's two ways out of that. One is to grow your way out by proper mowing and watering and fertilizing. Over a couple of seasons, you essentially choke out 90% of the weeds. There are some that will survive in a well cared for St. Augustine lawn, and you just have to go in and get them. If you right now are looking at a lot of weeds, those are warm season weeds,
Hmm.
and they're going to go away anyway on their own. The only thing I would say do now, and no one wants to hear this, is pull them up and get all the weed seeds that are attached to them, like the little aster that has little dime-sized pinkish lavender flowers. People are going to start to see blooming real soon. One of those plants can have 5,000 seeds. So
Mm.
one pulling up one little taprooted plant gets rid of all that for future year weeding problems. And so that's a good idea. What's going to germinate this month and next month is the cool season weeds. That would be things like clover and chickweed and henbit and all the things in spring you see that are weeds. Those
Mm.
are germinating in October, November. So you can put a pre-emergent down that prevents the seeds from establishing. A product like nitrophos barricade, for example, that's on.
Hmm.
By the way, I said I had a lawn care schedule. Also on the gardeningwithskip.com is a pest, disease, and weed management schedule. And they can go there and they can see when to apply and the product options for that. And barricade is an example. That prevents those seeds from germinating. So next spring, you don't even have the plants because you prevented them early on. After you miss preventing them, then you have to use something that kills existing weeds. And that's a whole nother thing.
Okay, very good. Another question here from Rubina. Any thoughts on planting Italian cypress versus juniper? And to get a dense look, how close should they be planted to each other? Does one fare better than the other in Houston?
Yeah. There's Italian cypress, juniper, arborvitae. Those are all similar plants. And, you know, in general, the Italian cypress I don't recommend. They are beautiful. And in a Mediterranean villa, they are what makes the place. You plant them in Houston, they start to get larger, and here comes spider mites, here comes foliage diseases. We have a number of blights of the foliage, and then there's bagworms that eat all the leaves off an area. Now you have this big dead hole in the plant that will never come back green again. So I think long term, I just see some really disappointing results. I see the appeal of the plant, but I'm just not a fan because of those issues. But junipers, Italian cypress, and all of those are fine. Just try to avoid over wetting the foliage. We already get plenty of rain here. And so if we also add to that by having sprinklers come on, especially those low growing carpet rug type junipers or the smaller shrub type junipers and arborvitae, the more you wet them, the more disease problems that you have. And that would be my only caveat on those.
Okay. Another question that just came in from Jennifer. She asked another crepe myrtle question. One of my crepe myrtles has some black stuff on the trunk. What can I do about this?
That's a scale called crepe myrtle bark scale, and it is problematic. We have options. They each have their I'll say yeah buts. The crepe myrtle bark scale can be managed with systemic insecticides that you drench on the soil, and they go up in the plant, and anything sucking juices out of the plant, which is what scale does, is it receives that poison and it kills it. The negative of those is in the summertime when crepes are blooming, that's when our pollinators are on the crepe myrtle flowers, like honeybees, for example. And so when we put a poison in the plant, that's a secondary effect that we really would rather avoid. So this may be more trouble than someone wants to go to. But if I have had a crepe in the yard, what I would do is in the spring, probably about March, I would go out and get some double sticky sided tape and put it around, excuse me, if you've got a little branch, I would put it all the way around the branch and then go out and just check it about every 3 or 4 days. Just walk by and look at it. And if you see little pinkish bugs that are crawling in it, that's the scale that have hatched out and are about to proliferate. From one mom scale comes about 100 babies. And that would be the time then that you would treat them. Just spray them with an insecticide to control them then. You may have to replace the tape every couple of weeks because of dust and stuff. But that way, I could tell you spray at this time of the year, like mid-April spray or something. But really, at your house, depending on the year we're having, that time could vary. And the little double-sided tape is the best way to monitor your crepe myrtle scale so you know at your house when to spray and you get the most bang for your buck with the less environmentally undesirable secondary problems.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. So you've mentioned your website and the schedule that's on there. Is that the best resource to learn more about making improvements? Or are there any other resources that you want to mention?
A lot of good ones. There's a website at A&M called Aggie Horticulture, and it's Aggie-Horticulture, or you could just do a search engine search for Aggie Horticulture.
Mm-hmm.
On there are links to something called we call EarthKind, which is an environmentally sound lawn care practice, or landscape care practices for that matter. There is information on fruit trees and all kinds of horticulture topics. There's also an Aggie Turf. Aggie Turf has information on turf weeds. Maybe you have a weed and you want to know what it is. Go to Aggie Turf, click on their weed information, and there's pictures of all kinds of grassy and broadleaf weeds. So those two websites alone for most landscape things are going to be a really good resource.
Excellent. Well, this has been very beneficial for our members, and we will put those websites in the comments for them as well so they can go check them out. One more question that looks like it just came in. Is now the time to divide daylilies?
Yes, now would be a good time. Anything that's going to bloom in the spring or summer, you could divide now. You can divide anything at any time, but sometimes it throws their bloom cycle off a little bit and they eventually get back on track. But this would be a good time for daylilies, being a summer bloomer.
Okay, very good. Again, you've shared so much great stuff. We have a lot on our to-do list for this weekend. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our members today?
Well, I may be biased, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. But people tell me that just listening to Garden Line makes your plants greener. So grab your house plants, gather them around you, turn on the radio, and we'll talk to you on Saturday or Sunday.
Right. Just take the radio outside and maybe walk around the yard with it, right? Well, again, Skip, thank you so much for your time today. This has been very helpful. And that is it for this Member Focus Monday. We will be back next Monday at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.